We are on YouTube right now.
We are live right now. Woo!
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. If you have been watching our Back from the Brink talks up to this point, then this is your 10th, and thank you for joining us on this journey. If this is your first, well then I hope you really enjoy it, and maybe afterwards you want to go back and watch some of the previous 9 because they're really great too. If this is your first talk, you're probably going, what on earth is Back from the Brink and what are you talking about? So I should probably explain it. Back from the Brink is a groundbreaking collaboration of conservation organisations working together to save England's most endangered species from extinction. But it's not what we're talking about today. In fact, for this entire series, we have been reaching out to different people to give their different perspectives on conservation and engagement and arts and creativity. We've got a wonderful talk today. If you've got any questions that pop into your head, please stick them in the chat at any point, and my able and beautiful assistant Jack will scoop those up and ask those questions at the end of the talk. Today we have a talk from Lucy Houliston, who is a National Geographic young explorer, and her passion is weird wildlife and telling the stories of weird wildlife. So I am delighted to hand over to Lucy.
Hello. Yeah, thanks for having me. Let me just share my screen so you can see what's happening. Can you see that? Is that working? Good. Okay, so yeah, welcome everyone who is here to my talk, Creative Conservation, Using Stories and Media to Save Weird Wildlife. And I'll be talking about how art, photography, music, film, writing, and even sport can all be used as tools to help save nature. And we'll get onto what exactly I mean by weird wildlife in just a moment. But first, I want to share a bit about me and what I'm up to currently. So right now I'm not in the jungle. I'm at Royal Holloway University studying for an undergraduate degree in zoology. And alongside my degree, I'm involved in a number of different things. So I'm a freelance digital content producer by trade, and the range of things that I do is quite broad, but they're all linked to the digital world and mostly to natural history and to conservation. I work as the social media manager and digital content producer for the Sloth Appreciation Society. It is a real thing. I'll be talking about that in a bit. And I'm about to jump back into a job I was involved with last year, which involves directing a live wildlife broadcast for the Wildlife Trust of South and West Wales. Earlier this year, I was lucky enough to be named as one of National Geographic's newest young explorers. So I've got a big project that I'm running, supported by them, that's just kind of got going really, and I'll be talking a bit about that later on too. But I've done quite a bit of conservation volunteer work since I was a teenager, and now I also serve on the board of directors for a brilliant organisation called Reserva, the Youth Land Trust, which some of you might have heard of. A few of our youth council members have given talks as part of this series actually, and it's an entirely youth-led organisation that's working to empower young people in biodiversity conservation and create a network of entirely youth-funded nature reserves across the globe. And the first one that we're going to create will actually be the world's first ever youth-funded nature reserve. And so the whole cause is just so unique and a really great thing to be involved with. So I want to take it right back to the very beginning, because for as long as I can remember, I've been a self-confessed nature nerd. In fact, my first ever detention, and sometimes I forget to tell this story, and I wish I didn't because I feel like it sums up young me very, very well. But my first ever detention was given to me for sneaking into an off-limits area of my school playground in year 3 to try and stroke bumblebees. And yeah, I wouldn't recommend any of you try that at home, but that's how obsessed with insects I was when I was a kid. And I would read reference books about them from cover to cover. And I remember my poor year 2 teacher who used to sit there during our English lessons and listen to me read out loud about the anatomy of a wasp, and I used to wander around with woodlice in my coat pockets, which obviously is a totally normal thing for an 8-year-old child to want to do. I was always really imaginative and really inventive and creative, and I was always drawing, always writing, always making things. And actually I came across this picture, I think just yesterday. This was one of my masterpieces that I came up with. It's made out of an old curtain tie, and I think that thing in the middle is a TV aerial stuffed into a tissue box. And yeah, it's supposed to be some sort of snake specimen. If you look at the name, it's the Nanan snake. The Latin name is Nanus vallius, and for context, my nan's name is Val. That's why it's got its Latin name. And this is the sort of thing that I used to come up with. And I used to write my own songs and write musical scripts and put on shows. And a lot of the time, they were inspired in some way by wildlife I'd interacted with out in the garden or in my local park, or maybe I'd seen it on TV. And I do think that my initial interest maybe stemmed from the natural history documentaries that I watched when I was younger. I remember seeing David Attenborough's Life in the Undergrowth for the first time, and I was just utterly transfixed by these completely alien looking things I could see in front of me. And I remember going over to my nan's and sitting with her to watch Spring Watch and Autumn Watch, and that really was like the highlight of my year when I was a kid. In fact, I once turned her garden into my very own RSPB nature reserve, and I put information placards up everywhere, and I documented all the goings on with pictures on social media. I think I made a Twitter account, and here are some of them that I managed to find. So yeah, from quite a young age, I had this interest in natural history broadcasting and storytelling in some capacity, as well as wildlife conservation. And I started to think about how the two can potentially come together. I'd experienced myself just how powerful the media, TV, books and magazines that I read, even the art that I made, could be in educating myself and the people around me about wildlife and some of the tough problems that it was facing as well, that sometimes can be quite hard to convey. Now, I grew up in the suburbs of London, and the thing with loving all the animals in my back garden and in my local park was that not many other people felt the same way about them. And I quickly caught on to this. People didn't find insects fascinating or cute like I did. And they all went out to, kill the slugs and the weeds growing and slithering around in their flower beds and chase pigeons off of their bird feeders. And I think that stuck with me. I could never, when I was young, I could never really understand why my friends and family and neighbours didn't see the creatures that I loved in quite the same way that I did. And that's if they even noticed them at all. And I so desperately wanted them to notice them and appreciate them. So I guess without even realizing, I sort of made it my mission to stand up for and champion these plants and animals. And that's something that now in my 20s, I feel like I'm doing more than ever before. So what exactly do I mean, because I keep going on about it, when I say I love weird wildlife? What exactly is weird exactly? Well, I looked at some definitions, some dictionary definitions of the word, and as an adjective, there are a number of meanings. One of them that I came across said that it suggests something supernatural, something unearthly, and then I found a few others saying, describing weird things as very strange, very unusual, unexpected, or not natural. And when it comes to describing wildlife, I see weird in that slightly broader sense as well. What comes to mind is the ugly. Think of this poor blobfish here. He was voted the planet's ugliest animal back in 2013, believe it or not. I also think of the underappreciated. If you're an arachnophobe, if you don't like spiders or insects, look away now. spiders. You know, a lot of people are scared of them, and yet they do all sorts of things for us. If you think about the services they provide, as well as the vital role that they play in the ecosystems, scientists have discovered fairly recently that some species' venom actually has really powerful medicinal properties, which is really interesting. When I think of weird animals, I also think of the otherworldly, like the sloth, and I'll talk about these in a bit. And I also think about the uncommon, the rare or the extremely elusive plants and animals. And talking of rare animals and plants, one of the rarest mammals in the UK is the water vole. This species suffered a 90% decline between 1989 and 1998. And it was all to do with a combination of habitat destruction and the introduction of a non-native predator, which was the American mink. And they were first brought here in around the 1920s to supply fur farms. And those that escaped or were released quickly turned to these aquatic voles as an easy and tasty food source. But water voles are still thriving, and this is the good news, in some well-managed areas. And their populations are increasing in certain parts of the country. And it just so happened that the RSPB reserve nearest to my family home, which is Rainham Marshes, was and still is a stronghold for these animals. And this was the place where I first started exploring the more creative side of conservation outside of the comfort of my own home, of my own back garden. I wrote about my experiences of some of the practical conservation work I did there. So cutting back brambles from the footpaths, brush cutting, surveying those water voles, removing invasive plants, all those sorts of things, on the Reserve's blog, also on my personal blog that I kept at the time, and in the RSPB's Teenage magazine. So going back a bit, when you really think about it, you know, all animals have something a tiny bit weird about them, even something that's as cute and fluffy as a water vole, you know, and I think most of nature is inherently odd. I've already mentioned that insects are up there at the top of my list of favorite wildlife weirdos, if you like, but we'll come back to those a bit later, because there's another odd animal that I touched on very, very briefly earlier, and that's an animal that I've become quite well acquainted with over the past couple of years, and that is the sloth. So before talking a bit more about my work with these animals, to kick things off, I've got for you 3 of my favorite strange sloth facts, and I'm going to jump straight in with number 1, which is to do with their claws. And sloth claws aren't your typical claws at all, but they are in fact elongated, protruding finger bones. So here's a picture. You can see that quite clearly in this photo. This is a 3-toed sloth skeleton. You can see those claws, those bones there. And while the claws of most other mammals are made of keratin, some of you might know this is the same material that our hair and our nails are made of. Theirs are made of bone, and that's mainly because this makes them really, really strong. And it means that sloths can hang around and clamber around upside down in the treetops without having any trouble. The second strange sloth fact that I've got for you is that they have very weird bathroom habits that are, at the moment, a complete mystery to scientists. Because sloths have such a slow rate of digestion, and to give you an idea of just how slow it is, it takes a 3-toed sloth like Marley here, on average, around 30 days to digest just a single leaf. So because their digestion is so slow, they only go to the toilet about once every 5 to 7 days, depending on the species. And when they do go, they don't just go up in the canopy. They actually climb all the way down to the base of the trees, down to the ground, which, as you can imagine, for a sloth takes quite some time. And once they're down there, they do what's become known as the Poo Dance. So they hold onto the tree trunk and they wiggle their bums around from side to side, and they dig a little hole in the ground with they've got short stumpy little tails, and they use that to dig a hole, and and that's where they will do their business. And then once they're done, they'll climb back up to the canopy again, and yeah, they do that around once a week. And scientists still haven't figured out why they do it. They've got no proof. They have theories, but they have no proof yet. Some think that it might be some sort of signposting system for potential mates, some sort of display of fitness. And so that's the sloth's strange bathroom habits. But moving on to the third fact, last but not least, these three-toed sloths can actually rotate their heads around a full 270 degrees. And the way that they do it, I've actually seen one. I think it might have been this sloth actually. I've seen it do this, and it kind of looks, I don't know if you've ever seen an owl turn its head. You kind of expect it to stop, but it doesn't. It just keeps on going. And the reason why this is beneficial is because it helps the sloth to search for food and find food in a very energy efficient way. It means it's able to graze the leaves that are growing all around it without having to move the rest of its body much, if at all. And that's great for an animal that has to survive on a diet of leaves, which provide them on average with around 180 calories a day. That's it. There are just so many weird things about sloths. I could go on forever, but that's one of the reasons why I love them so much. And I also feel like I kind of owe a little bit to the sloths, because not just that, they don't just offer us wisdom about how we can kind of live slower, more sustainable lives and live more in tune with nature, but personally they've also given me the chance to explore the more creative side of conservation in a professional sense, and to see it as a viable career path, and one that can be really, really effective actually in terms of engaging people with some really important environmental and animal welfare issues. So I started my work with the Sloth Appreciation Society back in 2018, and that involves mainly managing social media channels and spreading the word about our books and calendars. And once a year, I usually get the chance to fly out to Central America to help take photos of sloths for this calendar that we release every year. And while a lot of the stuff on our channels, I will admit, is just cute stuff, we kind of use that as a lure to get people who might not otherwise think about conservation or know much about sloth welfare interested, and then we sort of share some of these realities with them. And so you might be surprised to know maybe that lots of people in the US still think it would be perfectly acceptable for them to keep a sloth as a pet, but in actual fact, these animals are very prone to stress. They're difficult to keep healthy when they're so far away from their natural tropical forest habitat, and they almost always come from a market that's, a little bit corrupt and very inhumane, while baby sloths will be snatched from their mothers and shipped thousands of miles away to be supplied to the pet trade. And I think one of the most rewarding parts of this sloth job is when somebody messages us saying how much they'd love a sloth as a pet, or asking advice on how they might keep one or where they can source one from. And then when I carefully explain to them the reality of the situation, 99% of the time they say, oh, I had no idea. And they're really grateful for that information. And they say, I definitely won't get one now. And they completely change their mind in a matter of minutes. And sometimes they'll even share what they've learned with their friends and family, or maybe even donate to a conservation organisation instead. And being able to have an impact like that is, it's really, really fulfilling. And to see that you're actually making a difference really does mean a lot. So we also do what we can to support the rescue and conservation organisations that are working out in Central and South America where sloths can be found, sharing their fundraising campaigns, encouraging people to donate to them. And in summer 2019, I actually spent 3 months living and working at one wildlife rescue facility that's based out in Panama, the APPC. And my job really was to document life behind the scenes there and give people a real intimate insight into what it's really like to take care of a bunch of orphaned and injured sloths, because I think people think they sleep a lot and that it must be really easy work, but trust me, it's surprisingly difficult. It's a lot of work. And so I joined the sanctuary staff and streamed Sloth Breakfast Time live on Facebook. I edited some copy for the organisation's new website, and I covered the action as we headed out to rescue and release sloths on the Sloth Appreciation Society's Instagram stories. And through the process, not only did we generate support for this fantastic organisation and their wildlife rescue work, but we enlightened our audience on some of the challenges that sloths are currently facing. You know, a modern day wild sloth sadly now faces a greater level of threat from habitat loss than it does from any form of natural predation. And many of the animals that are brought into sanctuaries like the APPC have ended up either orphaned or injured as a result of habitat fragmentation. This, of course, increases the chance of a wild sloth wandering into an urban area. Maybe it will struggle to find food. It might come into contact with humans and other potential dangers like domestic dogs, busy roads, and even electricity power lines, which often doesn't end very well at all. But I guess the good news is that there are lots of organisations and individuals out there working to protect sloths and their habitats, rescuing animals, rehabilitating them and releasing them back into safer parts of the wild and protected parts of the wild where they belong and where they're safe. So as soon as I returned from that sloth-filled Central American adventure, I got the opportunity to use my social media, filmmaking, and perhaps more importantly in this case, my writing skills to support a second cause. And this time I was going from championing just one kind of animal online to a whole host of curious creatures. I joined Reserva, the Youth Land Trust, to protect a 1,219 acre patch of largely unexplored cloud forest in Ecuador. And this is the patch. It's incredible. And before I go into more detail about my work with Reserva, I thought I'd introduce you to some of the site's more unusual residents. Of course, it's packed full of all sorts of weird and wonderful plants. You can see how luscious and green it is. But here's one of them. This is a species of orchid called Phragmipedium fisheri. And it's pretty, but you might be wondering, you know, what's so unusual about it? Well, it's actually one of the rarest plants in the world. There are thought to be as few as 10 to 15 adult individuals of this species remaining on the planet. It's incredibly, incredibly rare. And the site is also home to these. This is a species of Boleta glossa salamander. That nose, I just love the nose. It has no lungs and it breathes through its skin. And it also, so I've been told, has the fastest tongue in the animal kingdom. The forest there is also teeming with frogs, which might not surprise you. Some of them haven't even been named or even discovered yet, though. This one I think is particularly interesting. It's a red-spotted glass frog. And even though these frogs are absolutely tiny, maybe it's about this big, like a few inches long. They are highly territorial. They are really ferocious. They're carnivores that feast on insects, and the males will actually fight each other to defend their patch. And they're even equipped with special weapons. I don't think you can see it on this picture, but the males of this species actually have a bony spine on the inside of their forelimbs, which they use to fight their opponents. And you might be able to see, you might have noticed that red spot there on the front toe pad of this frog. And that isn't a marking, it's actually a bloody patch. So that's probably from an earlier fight. So I've already touched on Reserva's mission, but I think it's important to mention the emphasis that they place on stories and storytelling as a channel for conservation action. There are currently over 50 young people from over 15 different countries who make up the organisation's International Youth Council. And when it comes to raising funds for our flagship project, which is the creation of this Ecuadorian reserve, I think we've showcased creative conservation at its finest, really. So first up, writing and photography. I am a complete novice photographer, but I do have experience in filmmaking and in writing. And it was that led me to being asked to join the first Reserva expedition storytelling team, and actually head out into the Ecuadorian wilderness for 2 weeks to document the discovery of several rare and brand new species with a team of local scientists. And the coverage of our adventures on social media and on Reserva's blog, it really helped to spark people's curiosity and to encourage them to support the organisation, which back then was really only just starting out. And all of those pictures that you saw just now, the orchid, the frog and the salamander, they were all pictures taken on that expedition. And we actually managed to see those species for ourselves while we were there. So over the course of the last year or so, our fundraising efforts have gone far beyond just Instagram pictures and blog posts. They seem to have gotten more and more creative. And last summer, during the lockdown, I was involved in organising, scripting and directing 2 online concerts that we streamed live on Rainforest Trust's Instagram, which helped raise over $4,000 for the cause. And we had a whole host of incredible speakers and musical artists come on. We had Olivia Rodrigo, singer and actress. We had Chris Bowers, who's an Emmy Award-winning pianist. We had Nat Geo presenter and filmmaker Philippe D'Andrade come on. And that was the concert itself. From the technical side, that was all done using Instagram, WhatsApp and Skype, and that was it. So we've put people's knowledge to the test as well in a live trivia night. We've created a series of Instagram live interviews with our youth council members, and last month we launched our second Run for the Rainforest virtual global 5K event. People can sign up to run, to walk, hop, paddleboard. We've had someone paddleboarding, whatever they choose to do, either a 5K or a 1 mile dash. And by doing that, they will protect almost an acre of threatened forest. And I can't move on without mentioning one of the most innovative ways, I think, that we at Reserva have harnessed the power of storytelling and creativity to raise funds for conservation. And that is through our 1 million letters campaign. And what we're doing is we're asking school children from all around the world to write an informal letter addressed to world leaders, explaining what it is they love about nature and why they think it should be protected. And we're encouraging art submissions too, for those kids that maybe prefer that or aren't as confident in their writing. And we're going to collate those letters and deliver them to world leaders, either virtually or in person, at the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. And there's more. Each one will be matched with $3 to directly fund our land conservation projects. So at the moment, by writing a letter or a poem or drawing a picture, a young person who might not necessarily have the funds to donate directly will raise enough money to protect a classroom-sized patch of rainforest. So it's a really, really great idea and a really unique way of raising money and a fun way of raising money for conservation. So that's really how social media, writing, art, and even music and sport can be used to drive positive change for wildlife and the environment. But there's also video too, and I mean, longer form video, not just the short things that a lot of us might post on social media, although they can be just as effective. But at the start of the talk, I mentioned how my initial connection was to our native wildlife and the plants and animals that I could find on my doorstep. And for that reason, I was so excited last year to work as an editor and live producer on Skoma Live, which is a digital program all about the wildlife of Skoma Island in Wales that was created in partnership with a local wing of the Wildlife Trust. And for that, I had to learn some new technical skills, as well as my, lean on my creativity, to essentially make the show happen. I turned my bedroom at the time, you can see in that photo there, into a kind of makeshift TV gallery. And I had the laptop and then 2 big monitors where I sat and directed the guests and the presenter. At the same time, I was fiddling around with a streaming software called OBS to essentially make sure that everyone watching was hearing and seeing the right things. So I had to play out the pre-recorded video segments and roll our opening titles and credits, move guests into and out of the stream on Skype, and show pictures and short clips with certain things when certain things were mentioned during the show. And there was a lot more pre-production kind of preparation that I also helped with, and it was all great fun. And the best part of it was that we raised some much needed funds to support the important conservation work being done on the island during the lockdown, during what was a really tough time for so many conservation organisations and charitable organisations. So one of my favourite strange animal facts that I learned while working on this show was that puffins' bills essentially glow in the dark. So take a look at this. This is a puffin bill glowing under ultraviolet light, and scientists think that this helps the birds to attract mates and maybe even feed their young. So it's been suggested that the glowing helps the chicks that are tucked away in the dark burrows to easily see their parents' beaks and take food from them. And seabirds, they are great, but I mean, puffins, they're so iconic. They don't have much trouble winning people over, let's face it. And I still worry about insect declines and amphibian declines and these species that are really struggling. And yet, because, you know, they're a bit ugly or creepy or slimy or tiny, they're just not getting the attention that they need, especially from the media. And that's where it comes back to storytelling. I think the stories that the media tells about certain animals has so much power to shape the way that we as individuals and as a society think about them. And I've thought a lot about that over the last few years. And while I've picked up these directing and live streaming and filmmaking skills, I've been starting to think about what I can do to really focus in on those species and drive a positive change for them. And so Weird and Wild Live was born. It's so early on in its life at the moment that we don't have any logos or anything. We just have lots and lots of ideas. But these ideas won National Geographic over last year, and they've come on board to fund the project. And the plan is to create a video-based educational program for primary school students across the UK. We're going to have an interactive weekly series that's going to be streamed live to classrooms, and it'll be accompanied by a bunch of paper-based educational resources that can help the kids learn more about what they've seen. And the focus of the entire series will be on the more bizarre side of the UK's wildlife. So I kind of wanted to put a weird and wacky spin on wildlife, and hopefully that will help to excite the audience of budding young conservationists and future scientists, and change theirs, and hopefully their parents as well, perceptions of some of the species that can be found here in the UK. And it'll also encourage them as well to actually get outside and interact with that wildlife and follow along with activities that we'll be providing to help them do their bit to conserve the nature that's living in their school grounds and maybe even their gardens too. So yeah, do keep your eyes peeled for more news on that over on social media. But for now, that's it. That was kind of a whistle-stop tour of all of the ways I have and still am using my media storytelling and creativity to help raise funds for conservation and protect the species and places that are so important to us all.
That was brilliant. It was so interesting to hear how you got into wildlife and how early it kind of was for you.
Yeah.
And incredible to see, you know, how well you've like used all this new software. I mean, here we are back from the brink streaming live on YouTube. And I was like panicking about how to do it. It took me ages to work it out. And there's you setting up your own production studio in your bedroom. I mean, it's pretty incredible what you can do now. But yeah, that was really, really good.
Thank you.
Got some questions that have come in. There's some pretty chunky ones in here.
Okay.
But hopefully you've got the insight that people need. So I'm going to start off with quite a big one here, and it's linked to young people and how they're getting into nature.
Mm-hmm.
So Gwen's asked, what can parents, teachers, guardians do to help foster an early relationship with nature like you had?
You know what? It's a really interesting one because a friend asked me the other day, actually, you know, was it are you interested in wildlife because your parents are interested in wildlife? And I think for a lot of us, that's the way that it goes. My parents always kind of encouraged me, but they basically let me get on with it, really. And I think that's the thing. It's really hard to say, because from my perspective, I'm not really sure where it came from. I think it was the documentaries. It was small things like going over to my nan's, and she loved her garden wildlife, and we'd see the birds, we'd see the foxes, we'd watch Spring Watch. And I think just maybe the main thing, particularly with things like insects and some of the animals that I touched on there, it is common for people to be frightened of spiders and things like that. And I think for parents to just try and like overcome that fear, or at least don't try not to instill that fear on kids. Let them discover these animals for themselves, and let them kind of go outside, get muddy, get mucky, just go and find these insects, put woodlice in their coat pockets and pull earthworms out of the ground. I think that's really important. And books were also a big thing for me. I don't know whether having nature books and things around would help, but that's what I'd say to that.
Yeah. Don't you think it's fascinating how much of children's literature and children's TV is like nature and animal based, but then how it kind of seemingly sort of disappears as you get a bit older? It's funny, isn't it? But I definitely think you're right in that being a big influence for a lot of people. And you've reminded me of a really a funny memory of mine to do with spiders and my mum, who I think is probably quite a big influence on me getting into nature. But she's a massive arachnophobe. So I'd see a spider. There was one particular one on this bush. It was a crab spider, and it would change colour to like white and green. And I'd be really interested in looking at it. And my mum would be there over my shoulder going, yeah, isn't it lovely? Like desperately trying to hide this like really bad arachnophobia so that I didn't feel frightened of them like she was. But I mean, I think for some people it's really tough to do that. Yeah. No, that was great. Yeah, great answer. I think you're completely right. I think it can be lots of different things. For some people, it's someone close to them. For some people, it's that kind of absorption of media. And yeah.
And I also think for people that are a bit older, teenage, kind of early to, well, anyone really, teenage and older, there's such a well-connected and passionate online community on social media of young naturalists, young environmentalists, and connecting up with those people is also really inspiring, and it can help keep that passion going. A time where things can feel a bit worrying and a bit bleak and a bit hopeless, you can feed off of other people, and we all kind of support each other, and I think that's a really great thing as well.
Yeah, that's really nice. I personally didn't have that, being a little bit older, I think, than you. But it's great to see that it's big with young naturalists now, like on Twitter and stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
That's brilliant. Yeah. Here's another pretty substantial question, and hopefully there are some young viewers here thinking, I want to get into making content for nature, or producing content, or doing communications. Ruth's asked, what experience, volunteering, or skills would you recommend to any young viewers today who are interested in getting into conservation, either as a content maker or communications officer? And what did you do to get into it?
So I'll kind of tackle the first part. I think it can be hard, because a lot of, in terms of conservation, a lot of things you do have to give up your time for free, and that's not always accessible to people. But I think if you've really got a passion for wildlife, what I did personally was I kept a blog for a long time, and that helped me pick up a few initial kind of writing bits. And just, I think the process of writing as well, it forces you to go and research and to go and learn more. And that's really important, is just having that base knowledge and having that genuine curiosity. Like staying curious is probably the most important thing. And if it's filmmaking you want to get into, go out and make videos. These things now, they don't need to be the most polished things, especially this year. We've seen people quickly pull things together, do these live streams that are a bit, they're not perfectly polished. It's not a blue chip BBC natural history documentary, but people really engage with them and they appreciate just kind of any information you've got, and they love to be shown wildlife. And if somebody's passionate about it and they're talking about it, then I think people will come to that and they will enjoy that. That's what I'd say, is just kind of start creating things and make sure that you're try different things out. It's different things might work, might be of interest, other things might not, but you don't really know until you try them out.
Yeah, just have a crack. I like that. Just get into it.
Yeah.
What did you do first? What do you think took you that next step?
Yeah, I think it was a lot to do with I got involved with my local reserve, RSPB reserve, Rainham Marshes, was running these young warden days, and I think I went to every single one that they ran because I discovered this reserve and I fell in love with it, and because I also loved birds as a teenager, so that was a great place for me to go. And I just got involved in practical conservation and just learning about that and having those close encounters with the wildlife and learning more about what was on my doorstep. I think that's what really got it started and kept that passion going, because it kept me learning about new things. And so it's hard to not be interested when you're continually learning new stuff.
Yeah, completely. Right.
Can I jump in with a question, Jack?
I knew you were going to do that. I was about to say this is the time that James jumps in.
I've been polite to the audience enough. It's my turn to speak. Lucy, back to the brink. We work with endangered species in the UK, and what we've found is that there's a significant proportion of the public. And when you talk to people about endangered species or threatened species, they go, yes, lions, rhinoceroses. And there's very much a perspective that species being endangered is a problem, but it's a problem that happens somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I suppose, what advice would you give us or anybody else that is trying to raise awareness of endangered species, obscure species at home?
That is a really difficult one, and I don't think I can kind of give the answer, because I feel like if there was an answer, somebody would be doing it by now. But with the Weird and Wild Live, the project with National Geographic, that's where I'm harnessing that storytelling thing. It's like, think of how much kids love things like Deadly 60, big predators, and aliens, and then dinosaurs, and things that they can have no interaction with these animals, but because they're so exciting and so alien and so unusual, they feel excited by them and they feel connected to them. And with this project, that was it. I kind of wanted to take the tiny little weird bugs and just play on that kind of alien thing, that strange thing, and just rewrite the stories, because I think I mentioned it's just that so much is to do with how the media portrays things. And that's what I'd say to that. I think it's very much rewriting the stories of those species, because we don't have the big megafauna, we don't have the top predators everywhere we look, and it's people become disconnected from UK wildlife. They think, it's boring. I'd rather look over in Africa and look at the African savanna wildlife. And I think we just need to use that kind of model of these are the dramas that play out on the African savanna, and put that here. That's kind of how I see it working. But I don't know. I think there are many, many layers to it.
No, thank you for that. No, that was really interesting. Thanks.
Yeah. Here's a chunky question again from someone called Wolf Rider. Why do you think there is a disconnect and lack of interest towards the natural world and people's knowledge, respect for it?
I don't know. The world that we live in now is so fast paced, and I don't know, you know, nature is becoming more and more removed from our lives, and everyone's aware of that. And I think there's also, I do kind of talk about this a lot, but I think it's true, you know, conservation, it's hard to get a job in conservation, and you need experience to get a job, but often that experience is unpaid. You know, it's, these reserves aren't always accessible, these wild spaces, and so there are barriers to a lot of people, and I think that interaction is just so important. And I do think that that is a key part, as simple as it sounds. Like you've mentioned, you know, all kids TV programs, books, everything are based on animals. I've never met a kid that doesn't love animals, and I think we're born with that interest in nature and that curiosity, and I think it's just keeping that going in this digital, like, urban world that we live in. But yeah, good question. It's quite a hard one to answer, but it's an interesting one.
Yeah, it's really, really tough to answer. I mean, all of us here in this live chat are basically trying to work on turning that around. But yeah. I think there's almost like 2 generations of disconnect now. So you've got in knowledge and understanding of the natural world, even at like a base level of, oh, there's a blue tit, there's a, you know, blackbird, etc.
That's it. It's if you're surrounded by people that know their thing and you can learn, and yeah, it's a lot easier to appreciate it, because it's good to know what you're looking at. It's good to understand a bit about it and find out more. But yeah, I agree. I think it's maybe parents as much as kids that kind of need to be encouraged back out into the natural world and to engage with it and interact with it.
Yeah, definitely. When I was working on the RSPB children's mags, that was a big part of what we were trying to do, alongside getting kids interested in nature and making content they'll like. There's also that element of supporting the parent or family unit in having those nature experiences themselves, because they also don't have much knowledge of the natural world, and you don't have to know what everything's called to have enthusiasm.
No,
it definitely helps if you have a kind of base understanding of what you're looking at, or why you're looking at it, or where it is, or when it is. But yeah, I think it's a huge question, and it's really, really tough to answer, because I think it's in a really, really difficult place at the moment, I think.
I think one thing that I think about, and maybe it's just me, is when you think of where do people get information from? Where do they, let's say somebody has a kind of an interest, you know, as you were saying, children are born with an interest, but how do we sustain it and build on it? And one thing I always think about is how, if you think about news, as in news programs on TV or newspapers, it's like my job is to pitch stories about back from the brink species to newspapers. You know, we will have a success with rugged oil beetles or checkered skippers or something, and we will try and encourage newspapers to publish that story. And it's a bit of a lottery whether they will or not, because do they want to tell a story about ants? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. If it's a slow news day, maybe they do. But actually, it's fascinating, because if you think of a newspaper, you know, it has a dedicated sports section. They never go, let's not do sports today. Let's not do celebrity news today. And yet the kind of environmental nature at home is kind of optional. And then but then I also think that now so many people are online, we've got social media, there's a lot more direct, the ability to interact directly with these kind of organizations or people sharing these stories. I think that's a positive thing. But then I do wonder if we end up siloing nature to an extent, because the great thing about a newspaper is you could pick up a newspaper and you're presented with a variety of topics that you may or may not have chosen to read. And yet within this online environment, you kind of get these very distinct communities based around different things. And you don't...
It's kind of like, it's a bit of an echo chamber, isn't it? I say this because somebody said to me before, oh, but your generation is so much more plugged into nature, don't you think? And I say, well, it's hard for me to say because everyone I follow on Twitter is, but I'm not getting the full picture of, 20 somethings everywhere, because I choose who I follow. I choose what news I follow and what stories I follow. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I feel like there's kind of bridging that gap could become even harder with that as we kind of go into our different interest groups essentially online.
Yeah, I think also like a kind of base cultural level, nature is kind of seen as other, like we're not part of it, and I think that's partly the reason. It is something that is a spectacle over there rather than something that's fully integrated into our lives, which it is, but we're not always necessarily aware of that, making it incredibly difficult to communicate its importance. But yeah, a huge question that you could probably talk about for hours and hours and hours. Here's one link to a question that James asked earlier from Lisa. Do you think that a species being ugly or obscure presents a barrier to people wanting to save them?
100%. I mean, the thing is, that again is another interesting one. If something's so ugly, look at the poor blobfish. That makes the headlines because it's funny. But just it's more like the kind of small things, creepy things, not the sensational ugly ones, but the ones in between, the ones slightly underneath that. And I think, yeah, there's also an element of like, well, what's attractive on film, what's attractive on camera, what can we easily like show people, if you're thinking about the media world, and those tiny insects and everything, they're not the easiest to capture, and yeah, I think it's maybe less to do with visual and maybe more to do with what we understand about their behavior. If we can relate, the more that we can relate to an animal and its behavior and its ecology, I feel like the more we connect with it and the more likely people are to donate. But then obviously if something's cute and fluffy, they do get the conservation attention because everyone wants to see a big fluffy panda, on a billboard or whatever. And yeah, it's a strange one. I wish the ugly creatures got more love, but
yeah,
they do in time.
Yeah, they're all important no matter how they look. Tom's got a nice comment and a question. Amazing talk, Lucy. Thank you so much. I just wanted to ask where you see your future heading in the field of natural history. Also, where can we find Weird and Wild when it's released to the public?
Okay, so future, I'm not. It's so hard to say, isn't it? I definitely want to carry on with the conservation, with the media side. Probably go along the kind of producing route, carrying on with what I'm doing already. And Weird and Wild Live, that is going to be available on YouTube, I believe. We're still kind of finalizing some of our technical logistics, but it should be available on YouTube, and it's also being developed in partnership with Reserva, the Youth Land Trust. And so we'll have snippets of it over there as well, and we will be creating our own social media channels soon so people can follow along with those and see how it's developing.
Cool. I'll link your social media, and then obviously you'll be promoting it when it comes out yourself, so then people will be able to pick it up there, I think, won't they?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Cool. That's all the questions in the chat. James, do you want to ask another question?
I do, please. I've got two, and
nice.
Hopefully they're quite straightforward. What's the best thing you ever saw at Rainham Marshes?
Ooh, I don't know. I would say I was fascinated by the lapwings. There are lots of lapwings there. It's named for its lapwings. But I think really hard to say. I mean, the water vole, I just remember one time that I went there and it was so close. We were just on one of the footbridges and it was a few meters away, just sat on its raft nibbling away at some reeds, and that was quite a good encounter. I think those iconic kind of species, to that reserve were great to see. And I remember seeing the wasp spiders as well. They were fascinating too. Managed to see a few of those. They were popped up in the autumn. So yeah.
Yeah, good choices. I've only been to Rainham a handful of times, but I remember going there and seeing Bryony ladybird, the ladybird that's like newishly colonised the UK, and it only lives on Bryony, and apparently Rainham's a bit of a hotspot for it.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, if you ever go back,
I'm gonna have to go
Bryony, find the ladybird. It's very good. And then my second question, this calls back to the very beginning when you were talking about your childhood and kind of the different sort of species you engage with then. And I was just interested in your opinion. What's the best slug? I like slugs. Are great.
Now you've kind of dumped me in it there because I don't know much about slugs. I just don't know much about them. So I'm just going to say all of them. I'm just going to say all of them.
Well, that's the correct answer. They're all
I'm going to have to go off and I'm going to have to learn my slugs. Ask me in a month and I'll be a slug expert. Maybe I can come back and give a talk about slugs next time.
Amazing. Cracking. I saw my best ever water vole sighting at Rainham. So I'll always remember that. Yeah, loved it. It was literally like a metre away on a log. Just read. So good. Awesome. That is everything. That's the whole talk and all the questions. So thanks very much to everyone who's come, and thanks for all the questions. Thanks to Lucy, of course, and thanks to James. That's our last talk in the series, I'm quite sorry to say, but we had 9 other brilliant talks over the past few weeks, which you can all watch on our YouTube channel. They'll be there forever. They're really great. Some are on diversity, some are on art, some are on species. So check those out. I'll leave a link in the chat. Other than that, it's time for me to say goodbye. So goodbye. And it's goodbye from
me. Goodbye.
Lovely.
Lucy, do you want to say goodbye?
Yeah, goodbye from me. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming, and see you soon, hopefully.
Bye.
Bye.